They said I couldn't store firewood on my own damn property. So I made sure the next time this HOA Karen tried to steal it, she'd regret it for the rest of her entitled life. 6:17 a.m., my security camera catches Bethany Whitmore, HOA president, real estate queen, destroyer of working men, sneaking across my lawn like a common thief. She's been threatening me with fines, liens, even lawsuits over my perfectly legal woodpile. Now she's taking matters into her own manicured hands. What she doesn't know, 6 logs are hollow decoys packed with pressurized black ink. Crack. The first one explodes like karma in liquid form, painting her designer face jet black. Her shriek could shatter windows 3 blocks away, cost me $47. Worth every penny to watch a bully get what she deserved. But before I tell you how we got here, I need to know, have you ever wanted to see an HOA tyrant get exactly what's coming to them? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I bet you've got stories too. My name's Ezra Blackstone, and 18 months ago I made the biggest mistake of my life. I trusted an HOA. Fresh off a brutal divorce that left me with half my assets and twice the motivation to rebuild, I bought a corner lot in Willowbrook Estates. Nothing fancy, just 127 homes of supposed suburban peace outside Columbus, Ohio, the kind of place where working guys like me could finally afford to live next to the white-collar crowd. My little slice included mature oak trees, a workshop that smelled like honest work, cedar shavings and WD-40, and enough space for my rescue dog Sawyer to forget we'd both been abandoned. Every morning I'd sit on the back porch with coffee, listening to cardinals sing over the distant highway hum, thinking I'd finally found somewhere that judged you by how you maintained your property, not your bank account. What a naive bastard I was. The previous HOA president, Margaret, was a retired teacher who understood that working people heat their homes differently than trust fund babies. When I asked about storing firewood for winter, she approved it immediately. Perfectly reasonable, Ezra. Save money and stay warm. Her email was clear, legal, and gave me hope that common sense still existed. Then Margaret moved to Florida, and the throne went to Bethany Whitmore. Imagine Karen's final form, a 48-year-old real estate agent who thinks expensive zip codes grant diplomatic immunity. Bethany's got that weaponized blonde bob that costs more than my monthly food budget, designer workout clothes that never see actual workouts, and a white BMW X5 that stays spotless even during Ohio's salt-covered winters. Her backstory? Divorced real estate queen specializing in upscale properties for discerning clients, which means she kicks out families like mine to flip houses for her wealthy friends. 2 teenage sons who spend most of their time at their dad's place, probably because living with Bethany feels like being audited by the IRS. She'd been HOA president for 9 straight years. 9 years of unchecked power over 127 families, and every single day had convinced her that working-class neighbors were a threat to her precious property values. The war started on a perfect October Saturday. I was splitting 2 cords of seasoned oak, enough to heat my house through winter and save over $800 on gas bills. The satisfying thunk of my maul-splitting wood filled the crisp air, along with that sweet smell of fresh oak that means security and warmth to guys like me. Then I heard it, the sharp crunch of expensive heels on gravel, like nails on a chalkboard. "Excuse me." Bethany's voice dripped with the condescension wealthy women reserve for people they consider beneath them. "We need to discuss your situation." She pulled out her phone and started photographing my neatly stacked woodpile like she was documenting a war crime. Actually produced a measuring tape, I swear to God, and started recording dimensions with the precision of a forensic investigator. "This violates our architectural guidelines," she declared. "Too visible from the street, creates a rural aesthetic inconsistent with neighborhood standards. Translation, poor people stuff makes rich people uncomfortable." I showed her Margaret's email approval. Clear permission, properly documented. Bethany's mouth twisted into that smile predators use before they strike. "Previous approvals don't transfer between administrations. We have higher standards now." She snapped a final photo. 14 days to remove this eyesore or face progressive fines. The crunch of gravel under her retreating heels sounded like a declaration of class warfare. That night, I researched HOA law and discovered something beautiful. Bethany had her own violations. Unpermitted deck expansion, fence height violations, the works. I documented everything with timestamp photos. If she wanted to play documentation games, I'd teach her the rules. What I didn't know was that she'd already decided working-class neighbors were incompatible with her vision of suburban perfection. This wasn't about firewood. It was about forcing out people who heated their homes with sweat equity instead of daddy's money. Game on, princess. Day 12 of my 14-day deadline, and Bethany decided subtlety was for peasants. The certified letter hit my mailbox like a legal bomb. Sawyer actually growled at the envelope. Smart dog knew trouble when he smelled it. The return address made my stomach drop. Willowbrook Estates HOA, urgent health violation. Inside was pure bureaucratic warfare. Immediate health hazard notice screamed across the top. Bethany had escalated from aesthetic complaints to claiming my woodpile attracted vermin and insects that pose a threat to community health and safety. Complete bullshit, but printed on official letterhead that made it feel real. The financial punch came next. $150, immediate fine plus $25 daily penalties starting day 15. Week 1 would cost me $175. Week 2 another $350. She was literally pricing me out of my own neighborhood over legally stored firewood. But the real knife twist? A footnote explaining that the HOA board had voted 3-2 in an emergency session to add a pest attraction clause to our guidelines, retroactively. Think about that. While I was working honest hours at Henderson Hardware, this woman called a secret meeting and changed the rules after the game had already started. Like getting a speeding ticket, then finding out they lowered the speed limit yesterday and decided to make it count for last week too. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. That evening, I dove into Ohio property law like my mortgage depended on it, because it basically did. Turns out there's this beautiful thing called Ohio Revised Code Section 5312.06 that specifically protects reasonable fuel storage for primary residence heating systems. State law beats HOA covenants every damn time when it comes to essential utilities. I'd stumbled onto the legal equivalent of a royal flush. Armed with actual law instead of Bethany's made-up rules, I filed a formal complaint with county code enforcement. Photos of her violations, timeline of harassment, relevant statutes, the whole package delivered with professional precision. Her counterattack was swift and personal. Thursday afternoon at work, I'm pricing lumber when the queen herself walks into Henderson Hardware. Bethany Whitmore in a real hardware store was like watching a vampire tour a garlic factory. She kept flinching every time the pneumatic tools hissed, clearly terrified that honest work might be contagious. Ezra, we need to discuss this privately. I kept organizing screws, letting the silence stretch until it got uncomfortable. Ma'am, HOA business goes through proper channels. I'm here as a neighbor. That fake, sweet politician voice that means you're about to get screwed. I think we can resolve this misunderstanding without involving outside authorities. The offer was beautifully simple. Drop my code enforcement complaint and she'd graciously allow me to keep my firewood. Just admit defeat, kiss the ring, and pretend her illegal retroactive harassment never happened. I'll consider it, I said, because sometimes the best move is letting your enemy think they're winning. But I was already 3 steps ahead. That evening, I ordered my insurance policy. Ring doorbell plus 2 discrete trail cams with night vision capabilities. If Princess Bethany wanted to escalate this war, I'd document every second of her illegal behavior. The cameras went up over the weekend, with Sawyer immediately trying to fetch the motion sensors like they were high-tech tennis balls. Then came the intelligence breakthrough that changed everything. Mrs. Patterson knocked on my workshop door Tuesday evening, her face carrying the weight of watching injustice unfold. This 73-year-old retired teacher had dealt with enough bullies to recognize Bethany's pattern. Ezra, you need to know, you're not her first target. The scope of Bethany's campaign was breathtaking. Tom Briggs, the electrician, got cited for parking his work truck in his own driveway. Elderly Mr. Dawson faced constant harassment over his vegetable garden. Single mother Lisa Morrison was fined for her kids' outdoor toys. Every victim shared the same profile. Working class, older, single, or new to the neighborhood. People without the resources or connections to fight back effectively. But Bethany had made one crucial miscalculation. She'd picked a target who documents everything, researches obsessively, and really, really hates bullies. Wednesday night, I placed my first craft supply order: liquid latex, food-grade black dye, clear plastic film, and corn syrup for consistency. Total investment, $47. If she wanted to play games with my property, I'd give her a game she'd never forget. Thursday evening brought the final piece of intelligence. Mrs. Patterson spotted Bethany's BMW making slow passes by my house after dark, clearly scouting for Friday morning's final documentation before her artificial deadline expired. Perfect. Let her come examine my woodpile up close and personal. The trap was set, the cameras were rolling, and justice was about to get very, very messy. Friday morning came and went without incident. Bethany's BMW never showed. For 24 blissful hours, I thought maybe she'd back down after realizing I had legal ammunition. I should have known better. Monday morning, I'm drinking coffee on my back porch when a white city van pulls into my driveway. Official logo, clipboard-carrying inspector, the whole intimidation package. Turns out our dear HOA president had escalated to biological warfare. She'd filed a complaint with Columbus City Health Department claiming I was operating an unlicensed commercial woodworking business from my home. The evidence? Photos of last week's lumber delivery for my personal hobby projects, shot from the street like some kind of industrial espionage operation. She'd twisted my weekend carpentry into a zoning violation that could cost me thousands in fines. Inspector Williams was a decent guy doing his job, but I still had to take unpaid time off work to deal with Bethany's manufactured crisis. He poked around my workshop for an hour, found absolutely nothing commercial about my hand tools and weekend projects, and left with an official "no violations found" report. But the damage was done. There's now a city file with my name on it, marking me as a complaint property in some bureaucrat's database. Bethany had weaponized the entire municipal system against a guy who just wanted to heat his house cheaply. That evening, I decided to fight fire with documentation. I pulled every HOA meeting minute from the past 2 years. Public records that revealed the beautiful pattern of Bethany's selective enforcement. Tom Briggs cited for his work truck, while board member Davidson's son parks his lifted Chevy in the same violation daily. Mr. Dawson harassed over vegetable gardens, while Bethany's friend Sandra operates an actual home bakery business without permits. 23 instances of unequal rule application, all favoring her social circle while targeting working-class neighbors. Ohio courts hate selective enforcement. It makes HOA covenants legally meaningless when applied with obvious bias. But while I was building my legal case, I was also building something more immediate. My workshop smelled like a craft store explosion, liquid latex mixed with the familiar scent of cedar shavings, creating an oddly satisfying chemical cocktail. I'd watched enough YouTube tutorials on special effects makeup to understand pressure-activated breakaway containers. The science was surprisingly simple. Create a hollow chamber, fill it with non-toxic black dye mixed with corn syrup for maximum sticking power, then seal it with a latex membrane designed to rupture under 15 pounds of pressure. The perfect firewood booby trap. I hollowed out 6 logs with surgical precision, each one indistinguishable from the real oak surrounding it. The chambers got filled with my custom ink mixture, food-grade black dye that would wash out eventually but stick like guilt in the meantime. Clear plastic film held everything in place until the moment someone grabbed hard enough to trigger the pressure release. When curious Mrs. Patterson asked about my evening workshop activities, I told her I was making decorative planters for spring garden projects. Technically true, they were decorative, and they'd definitely plant some consequences in someone's memory. Wednesday brought another intelligence update. Tom Briggs, working on electrical repairs next door to Bethany's castle, overheard a phone conversation that made my blood boil. Once I get rid of the blue-collar types, Bethany told some real estate client, property comps will jump 15 to 20%. It's all about maintaining the right demographic profile. There it was. Naked discrimination wrapped in property value rhetoric. She wasn't enforcing community standards. She was conducting ethnic cleansing based on paycheck size. That night, I positioned my hollow logs strategically within the woodpile. Mixed them with regular logs to avoid suspicion, but placed them where someone conducting a thorough inspection would naturally grab them first. The cameras got adjusted for perfect coverage, with backup angles ensuring no blind spots. Thursday evening delivered the final piece of the puzzle. Mrs. Patterson spotted Bethany power walking past my house twice during her usual 6:15 a.m. routine, clearly timing her approach for maximum privacy. Friday morning reconnaissance, setting up for Saturday's assault. But I had different plans for Friday. The weather forecast showed perfect conditions, clear skies, mild temperature, excellent visibility for cameras. I set 3 alarm clocks for 5:45 a.m., charged every battery in the house, and made sure Sawyer would stay inside during the morning excitement. Everything was ready. 6 hollow logs loaded with black karma, cameras positioned like a film crew, and one very entitled woman about to learn that stealing has consequences. The only question was whether she'd grab one log or get greedy and trigger multiple ink bombs. Either way, Friday morning was going to be educational for everyone involved. Justice was about to get very, very messy. Friday passed quietly, but Saturday morning brought a gut punch that changed everything. I'm reviewing my trail camera footage over coffee when I spot something that makes my blood freeze. Two men in dark clothing moving across my property at 2:17 a.m. with professional photography equipment, long lenses, infrared flash units, systematic documentation of every angle of my house, workshop, and woodpile. They spent 43 minutes treating my home like a crime scene. The real kicker? Security footage caught their license plate, a white pickup registered to Elite Property Services. Bethany's own real estate company had hired private investigators to build a case against me while I slept. That afternoon, the legal bomb dropped. Certified mail from Whitmore and Associates Property Law, she'd retained an actual attorney. The lawsuit threat was beautifully crafted psychological warfare, ongoing harassment, defamation, and creation of neighborhood hostility, demanding $3,200 in attorney fees plus immediate surrender. According to her lawyer's fiction, I'd been stalking Bethany by documenting her violations, intimidating neighbors with legal research, and creating a hostile environment damaging property values throughout Willowbrook Estates. Most working guys would crumble under legal pressure. Attorney fees alone could bankrupt a divorced carpenter trying to rebuild his life. But Bethany had forgotten one crucial detail. I rebuilt my lawyer friend Danny's deck for free last summer, and payback was a beautiful thing. Danny's response letter was professional violence in legal language. He pointed out that Bethany's documentation proved she'd been illegally monitoring my property, cited Ohio harassment statutes protecting homeowners from HOA retaliation, and casually mentioned that hiring private investigators to photograph someone's home might constitute criminal stalking. The nuclear option? A federal civil rights complaint for housing discrimination based on economic class, lawsuit potential that could cost her real estate license and expose the HOA to massive liability. Her attorney withdrew Tuesday with a terse letter about pursuing alternative resolution methods. Translation, we'd called her bluff and she'd folded like a cheap lawn chair. But legal victory only escalated her ground war. Wednesday evening brought Mrs. Patterson's urgent knock. Bethany had spent the afternoon conducting door-to-door psychological operations with a petition to maintain community standards against disruptive residents. She was building political ammunition for an emergency HOA meeting with expanded enforcement powers. The petition was propaganda genius. No mention of firewood. Just vague threats about residents who bring commercial activities, unsightly storage, and hostile attitudes into our peaceful community. She'd transformed me into every homeowner's nightmare neighbor. But my intelligence network had grown. Tom Briggs reported 14 households refusing to sign, more support than Bethany realized. 3 board members were getting nervous about legal liability from her increasingly aggressive tactics. Then Thursday night delivered the moment that sealed her fate. I'm in my workshop, making final adjustments to hollow log pressure mechanisms, when Sawyer erupts in barks that could wake the dead. Through the window, Bethany's white BMW sits across the street with engine running, conducting full surveillance of my evening routine. For 22 minutes, she played Suburban Spy. Telephoto lens photographing through my workshop windows, clipboard notes documenting my activities, professional-level stalking that would make any restraining order attorney smile with dollar signs. When I stepped outside for Sawyer's bedtime routine, her headlights snapped on and she drove away at exactly the speed limit. Calculated intimidation designed to make me feel watched, followed, hunted in my own neighborhood. That night, everything clicked into focus. This wasn't about firewood anymore. It was about power, control, and one entitled woman's belief that working-class neighbors were incompatible with her vision of suburban perfection. Fine. If she wanted to play surveillance games, I'd give her something worth watching. My hollow logs got their final positioning within the woodpile. 6 pressure-activated ink bombs disguised as ordinary oak, each one calibrated to rupture under 15 pounds of grabbing force. The cameras received precise adjustments for optimal impact coverage, but more importantly, I documented her entire escalation campaign. Private investigators, legal intimidation, door-to-door propaganda, and now nighttime stalking, all building toward tomorrow's inevitable confrontation. Friday's forecast promised perfect conditions, clear skies, excellent visibility, mild temperature for optimal ink distribution. I set 4 alarm clocks for 5:30 a.m. and triple-checked every camera battery. Mrs. Patterson confirmed Bethany's morning routine remained unchanged. 6:15 a.m. power walk, including her property inspection loop past my house. Tomorrow, her inspection was going to get very hands-on. The trap was set, the evidence was documented, and justice was locked and loaded with $47 worth of non-toxic black karma. At exactly 6:17 a.m., Bethany Whitmore was going to learn that some fights choose you, and some traps spring themselves. The bombshell that changed everything came from 60-year-old Tom Briggs crawling through a basement ceiling with electrical wire. Thursday afternoon, Tom was running new circuits at the Henderson house, directly next door to Bethany's castle on Magnolia Circle. Old houses mean thin walls, and Bethany was conducting business on her back patio with the confidence of someone who'd never considered that electricians have ears. "Margaret, darling, let me explain how property value management really works." Bethany's voice carried that practiced real estate agent tone she used when explaining obvious truths to stupid people. "It's all about demographic curation." Tom froze in the ceiling, wire forgotten, as her words drifted through the basement window. "I've been systematically upgrading this neighborhood for 3 years. The key is identifying undesirable elements and creating pressure until they self-select out of the community." Her laugh was cold enough to freeze hell. "The Carpenter on Oak Street is my current project. Single, divorced, blue collar, exactly the demographic that suppresses comparable sales." The smell of electrical insulation mixed with Tom's rising anger as he listened to this woman casually discuss destroying his friend's life. "Once I eliminate the remaining working-class residents, comparable sales will jump 15 to 20%. My clients understand that exclusivity requires maintenance." Another pause for sipping what was probably wine that cost more than Tom's weekly grocery budget. Men like Ezra Blackstone simply don't belong in communities like Willowbrook Estates. Tom's hands were shaking when he called me that evening. "Ezra, I recorded something you need to hear, and brother, it's going to make you sick." The audio file he sent was pure criminal evidence. Bethany explicitly admitting to housing discrimination, discussing specific neighbors by economic status, bragging about conducting what amounted to financial terrorism against working families. But that was just the appetizer. Monday morning, I exercised my legal right as a homeowner to request complete HOA financial records. Most people never bother. They assume boards are honest and competent. What arrived 3 days later proved how naive that assumption was. The numbers told a story of systematic theft disguised as community service. Our 127 homes paying $285 monthly generated $38,000 annually. Legitimate expenses, landscaping, insurance, legal fees, totaled maybe $22,000. The missing $16,000 had vanished into administrative consulting fees, paid to Whitmore and Associates Real Estate. Bethany had been embezzling from her own neighbors for 3 years, while simultaneously harassing them out of the community. She'd stolen $47,000 from families she was actively trying to destroy. The financial records read like a masterclass in corruption. Inflated landscaping contracts awarded to her business partners, legal fees for harassment campaigns she'd initiated, consulting services, with no documentation of actual work performed. Danny's reaction when I called with updates was immediate and brutal. "Ezra, you've uncovered a federal housing discrimination case plus embezzlement charges that could put her in prison. This woman isn't just a neighborhood bully, she's a career criminal." The beautiful irony? Bethany had no idea her empire was crumbling. She was still planning her Friday morning inspection of my woodpile, still believing she was dealing with an isolated working guy who'd eventually surrender under pressure. Instead, she'd picked a fight with someone who'd accidentally documented her entire criminal enterprise. Friday's ink trap was still happening exactly as planned. But now those 15 seconds of black karma would be the opening scene of a federal civil rights case that would destroy her real estate career, criminal charges that might land her in prison, and civil lawsuits that would bankrupt her stolen lifestyle. Tomorrow morning she'd get covered in ink for trespassing. Next week she'd get covered in handcuffs for stealing. Justice was about to be very, very thorough. Thursday evening, my workshop became mission control for the most satisfying operation of my life. The familiar smell of cedar shavings mixed with the metallic tang of justice as I spread everything across my scarred workbench. Tom's explosive audio recording, 3 years of HOA financial records that read like a crime novel, and enough documentation to make federal prosecutors do backflips. Danny joined via video call from his downtown law office, loosening his courtroom tie with the grin of a man who'd just found buried treasure. "Ezra, what you've stumbled onto here isn't just neighborhood drama. This is federal courthouse material. Multiple felonies with a civil rights cherry on top." Around 7, Mrs. Patterson knocked with a casserole that smelled like heaven and intelligence that felt like divine intervention. "Tom told me about the recording," she said, setting down enough comfort food to feed a construction crew. "I think it's time you learned about our little documentation project." Turns out, half the neighborhood had been quietly building a case against Bethany for months. Mrs. Patterson kept detailed logs in old grade books, tracking every harassment incident with the precision of someone who'd spent 40 years managing teenage behavior. Tom had photographed selective enforcement in real time. His work truck cited while board member Davidson's son parked his lifted Chevy in identical violations daily. Even quiet Mr. Dawson had been documenting Bethany's property surveillance with timestamps that would make a private investigator proud. We weren't just one angry carpenter anymore. This was a community uprising armed with evidence that could topple governments. Danny walked us through the legal ammunition with the patience of someone explaining nuclear physics to kids. Ohio fair housing law specifically prohibits discrimination based on economic status. We've got her on tape confessing to systematic targeting of working-class families. That's federal civil rights territory with criminal penalties. But the embezzlement angle was pure prosecutorial porn. I'd learned from my research that Ohio law requires HOA boards to maintain detailed financial records available to any homeowner. Bethany's mysterious consulting fees violated fiduciary duty statutes carrying both criminal penalties and personal liability for every stolen dollar. $47,000 in community theft that she'd have to repay with interest. The beautiful legal irony? She'd been stealing money from the same families she was harassing out of the neighborhood. That combination triggered enhanced penalties under Ohio's aggravated theft statutes, turning misdemeanor harassment into felony racketeering. Here's your knockout punch, Danny continued, scrolling through printouts. Her recorded admission of manipulating property values through discriminatory practices could trigger federal RICO investigations. We're talking organized crime statutes for suburban HOA corruption. While we planned legal warfare, I was perfecting something more immediate and infinitely more satisfying. 6 hollow logs lay arranged on my workbench like artillery awaiting deployment. Each one looked identical to the real oak surrounding them, but packed with pressurized karma that would explode on contact. The latex membranes were calibrated to rupture under 15 pounds of grabbing force, enough to trigger with theft but not accidental brushing. My ink mixture was chemical poetry, food-grade black dye mixed with corn syrup for maximum skin adhesion, completely harmless but guaranteed to mark Bethany like a scarlet letter for days. It would eventually wash out, but not before ensuring weeks of public humiliation every time she showed her face at Starbucks. Mrs. Patterson had mapped Bethany's morning routine with military precision. Power walk starting at 6:15 a.m. sharp, including a property inspection circuit that brought her past my woodpile at exactly 6:17. Recent pattern analysis suggested escalating boldness. Yesterday's surveillance indicated tomorrow might involve actual hands-on evidence gathering. Perfect. My camera array was positioned like a Hollywood film crew with backup batteries preventing any technical failures. Motion detection was calibrated for human movement. Audio recording was completely legal under Ohio's single-party consent laws, and automatic cloud backup meant no mysterious equipment malfunctions. The witness coordination was beautiful. Tom would coincidentally check his mailbox at 6:20. Mrs. Patterson planned to water plants with perfect sightlines for trespassing documentation. Mr. Dawson's morning Tai Chi would provide additional angles. The entire neighborhood wanted front row seats for Bethany's downfall. But Tom's cousin at Channel 6 News made everything perfect. A story about an HOA president caught stealing firewood while embezzling community funds was exactly the human interest gold that local news craved. David versus Goliath with video evidence and federal crimes, the kind of ratings magnet that would make Bethany's humiliation permanent and viral. Friday's forecast promised ideal conditions. Clear skies, perfect visibility, mild temperature for optimal ink distribution. I'd set 4 alarms for 5:30 a.m. and planned like D-Day. The hollow logs received final positioning within my woodpile, strategically placed where someone conducting aggressive inspection would naturally grab them first. Real logs provided camouflage, but the booby traps occupied prime real estate for maximum impact. As evening settled over Willowbrook Estates, I realized this had evolved beyond personal revenge into community justice. Tomorrow's 15 seconds would be hilarious, but the following weeks would systematically destroy a woman who'd made terrorizing working families her specialty. Bethany Whitmore was about to discover that some explosions come in stages, and tomorrow's ink bomb was just the opening act. Friday morning, 5:47 a.m. I'm sipping coffee on my back porch watching the sun paint Willowbrook Estates golden when my phone buzzes with a text that makes my blood freeze. Tom Briggs. Bethany's BMW just pulled into the Hendersons' driveway. She's got someone with her. 2 people heading toward your property on foot. So much for a solo morning jog. The Queen had brought backup. I slipped inside to check my security monitors, and what I saw made me grab my phone to start recording. Bethany and a man in a dark suit were walking directly toward my woodpile, but this wasn't casual surveillance. They were carrying professional equipment. Digital camera with telephoto lens, measuring tape, what looked like some kind of electronic device. The guy had to be a private investigator, maybe the same company that had photographed my house at 2 a.m. last week. Bethany was escalating to full corporate espionage over firewood. Through my kitchen window, I watched them approach my property line with the confidence of people who believed rules didn't apply to them. The investigator was photographing everything, angles of the wood pile, sightlines from the street, even the spacing between individual logs. Then Bethany pointed directly at my security cameras. I couldn't hear their conversation, but her body language was pure fury. She'd spotted my trail cams and realized I'd been documenting her harassment campaign. The investigator was making notes, probably calculating how to neutralize my evidence gathering. That's when they crossed onto my property. No hesitation, no permission, just casual trespassing by two people who clearly believed their money granted them access to anything they wanted. The investigator started measuring distances, while Bethany photographed my woodpile from multiple angles, building what looked like a detailed surveillance report. But here's where it got truly criminal. They started handling my logs. The investigator was lifting pieces of firewood, examining the stacking pattern, taking close-up photos of individual logs like he was building an evidence file. Bethany stood behind him giving directions, pointing at specific sections of the pile. Neither of them had any idea that 6 pieces weren't actually logs at all. I grabbed my phone and called Danny's emergency number. They're on my property right now, handling my firewood with professional photography equipment. This has to be criminal trespassing. Ezra, keep recording everything. Danny's voice was sharp with legal excitement. If they're conducting commercial surveillance on private property without permission, that's criminal trespassing with enhanced penalties. We're talking felony territory. The investigator was getting more aggressive, actually reorganizing my woodpile to photograph the arrangement from different angles. Bethany was directing him like a film producer, clearly building some kind of documentation package for legal purposes. Then, disaster struck. For them. The investigator grabbed one of my hollow logs to move it for a better camera angle. The pressure-activated membrane ruptured with a satisfying crack that echoed across the quiet subdivision like a gunshot. Black ink exploded across his expensive suit and professional camera equipment in a geyser of perfect karma. The man stumbled backward, covered head to toe in food-grade dye that turned his white shirt into abstract art. But the real beauty was Bethany's reaction. She lunged forward to help him, grabbing another hollow log for support. Crack. The second ink bomb detonated like a black paint grenade, coating her designer workout clothes and perfectly styled hair in sticky justice. Both of them stood there for a frozen moment, dripping black dye onto my gravel driveway, looking like they'd been dunked in liquid karma. The investigator's camera was ruined, his suit was destroyed, and Bethany looked like she'd been tarred without the feathers. The screaming started immediately. "This is assault! Criminal booby traps! We're calling the police!" Bethany's voice reached frequencies that probably violated noise ordinances. She was pulling out her phone with ink-stained fingers, trying to dial while black dye dripped onto the screen. I stepped onto my porch with my own phone, calmly recording their meltdown. "Good morning, folks. Can I help you with something? You seem to have had an accident with my decorative planters." Decorative planters? The investigator was trying to wipe ink off his ruined camera. "These are booby traps." "Sir, those are craft projects that broke when you handled them without permission on my private property." Every word was chosen for legal protection. "Are you gentlemen conducting some kind of commercial surveillance operation?" The investigator looked at Bethany with the expression of someone realizing he'd been hired for an illegal job. Professional photographers don't usually expect to get covered in ink while trespassing, and his body language screamed liability lawsuit. They retreated to Bethany's BMW, dripping black evidence all over her white leather seats. As they drove away, I could see her gesticulating wildly while making phone calls, probably to lawyers who were about to explain why hiring investigators to trespass on private property was a supremely bad idea. My hollow logs had just upgraded simple theft to commercial burglary with professional conspiracy. The legal ammunition was getting more explosive by the minute. The real war started 3 hours after the ink incident, when a Columbus police cruiser pulled into my driveway. Officer Martinez stepped out looking like a man who'd already heard one side of a very interesting story. Behind him, a second patrol car arrived carrying his partner and what appeared to be a supervisor. 3 cops for a property dispute seemed excessive until I remembered Bethany's real estate connections probably extended into city government. Mr. Blackstone, we've received a complaint about assault with booby traps and destruction of property. Mind if we take a look around? I handed him Danny's business card before saying a word. Officer, I'd be happy to cooperate, but I should mention my attorney will want to be present for any formal questioning. What I can tell you is that 2 people trespassed on my property this morning and damaged some craft projects while conducting unauthorized surveillance. Martinez raised an eyebrow. Surveillance? Ma'am said you set booby traps to attack innocent joggers. Officer, would innocent joggers bring professional photography equipment and measuring tools? I pulled out my phone and showed him the security footage. This is what happened at 5:52 a.m. Watching 3 cops review video of Bethany and her hired investigator systematically trespassing, photographing private property, and handling my belongings without permission was pure entertainment. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to professional interest to barely concealed amusement as the ink explosions played out in high definition. Sir, the supervisor finally said, those folks were clearly trespassing and conducting what looks like commercial surveillance without permission. You got any paperwork on these craft projects? I'd prepared for this moment. YouTube tutorials on hollow log planters, receipts for all materials, photos of the construction process. Everything was non-toxic and designed for decorative purposes. When they broke from being handled aggressively, the contents spilled. Officer Martinez was scrolling through my documentation with the expression of someone trying not to laugh. Food-grade dye, corn syrup, latex membranes, looks like special effects makeup supplies. Exactly. I was making decorative containers for spring garden projects. They weren't designed to be grabbed and moved around by unauthorized persons. The supervisor looked up from the footage. Mr. Blackstone, we're going to need a copy of this video for our report. Looks like Miss Whitmore might have some explaining to do about why she hired a private investigator to photograph your property. After the police left with handshakes and what seemed like genuine sympathy for my situation, the real escalation began. By noon, a process server arrived with papers that made my morning seem quaint by comparison. Bethany had filed for an emergency restraining order claiming I posed an immediate threat to community safety through criminal booby traps and stalking behavior. The legal filing was a masterpiece of creative fiction. According to her sworn statement, I'd been conducting a months-long harassment campaign involving weaponized yard decorations, surveillance intimidation, and conspiracy to damage property values through hostile behavior. She was asking the court to prohibit me from maintaining any decorative containers on my property, ban me from photographing or documenting neighborhood activities, and force me to relocate my firewood to an area not visible from public streets. Basically, she wanted a judge to strip away my property rights because her criminal trespassing had embarrassing consequences. Danny's response was swift and brutal. He filed a counter-motion for harassment restraining order against Bethany, attaching her recorded admission of discrimination, evidence of embezzlement, documentation of the hired surveillance, and police reports from this morning's trespassing incident. But the afternoon brought an escalation that crossed every line of decent behavior. Mrs. Patterson called at 3:17 p.m. with a trembling voice that immediately put me on high alert. Ezra, there's something wrong. My mailbox has been vandalized and someone scattered trash across my front yard. I jogged over to find her normally pristine property looking like a tornado had hit. Garbage scattered across her lawn, mailbox bent at an odd angle, and, most disturbing, dog feces smeared on her front door handle. Mrs. Patterson, when did this happen? Sometime between lunch and 2 o'clock. I was napping and heard nothing. Her hands were shaking as she surveyed the damage. Ezra, I think this is because I've been helping you. Tom Briggs pulled up in his work truck, took one look at the destruction, and his face went dark with anger. This is retaliation. Bethany's sending a message to anyone who supports you. We spent the next hour cleaning Mrs. Patterson's property and documenting everything for police reports. But the real message was clear. Bethany had declared war on the entire neighborhood support network. That evening, 2 more households reported similar vandalism. Mr. Dawson's garden was trampled and someone had slashed the Johnsons' garden hose. All supporters of my cause, all targeted within hours of the morning's ink incident. The woman who'd been embezzling from community funds was now conducting domestic terrorism against elderly neighbors who dared to stand up for justice. It was time to end this war permanently. Saturday morning brought the moment I'd been building toward for months. Emergency HOA meeting called by angry homeowners who'd had enough of Bethany's reign of terror. The Willowbrook Community Center hadn't seen crowds like this since its grand opening. Cars packed the parking lot, neighbors who'd never spoken were clustering together, and the energy felt like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Mrs. Patterson arrived with a folder thick enough to choke a horse. Tom wheeled in a projector he'd borrowed from his electricians union, and even quiet Mr. Dawson showed up carrying what looked like evidence boxes. Channel 6 News was setting up cameras near the entrance. Tom's cousin had delivered on the media angle, and reporter Jessica Walsh was interviewing neighbors about allegations of HOA corruption and discriminatory enforcement. Inside, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. 89 households represented, the highest attendance in Willowbrook history. Bethany sat at the board table looking like a defendant awaiting sentencing, still showing faint ink stains around her hairline despite professional cleaning attempts. The meeting opened with standard procedural nonsense, but the crowd wasn't interested in Robert's rules. Voices started calling for the real agenda: financial transparency, selective enforcement, discrimination complaints. Board member Davidson tried to maintain control, but the dam burst when Mrs. Patterson stood up with her teacher voice that could silence rioting teenagers. I move to address systematic harassment and financial impropriety by our current president. The crowd erupted in applause that drowned out Bethany's objections. Tom connected his laptop to the projector, and suddenly Bethany's voice filled the room through speakers that carried her recorded confession to every corner. I've been systematically cleaning up this neighborhood for 3 years. Once I eliminate the remaining blue-collar elements, comps will jump 15 to 20%. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear hearts breaking as neighbors realized they'd been living next to someone who viewed working families as vermin to be exterminated. But the financial records were the real knockout punch. I stood up with 3 years of HOA budgets spread across poster boards like a prosecutor presenting evidence. $38,000 annual income from homeowner dues, $22,000 legitimate expenses. Where's the missing $16,000, Bethany? The crowd turned toward her like a jury waiting for explanation. Administrative consulting fees, she stammered. Perfectly legal professional services. What services? Tom's voice cut through her deflection. Your company received $47,000 for undefined consulting while you harassed working families out of the neighborhood. The room exploded. Neighbors shouting questions, demanding answers, calling for immediate resignation. Davidson was banging his gavel uselessly while Bethany tried to maintain control of a situation that had completely escaped her grasp. That's when Jessica Walsh and her camera crew entered the back of the room. The reporter's presence changed everything. Suddenly, this wasn't just a neighborhood meeting. It was public theater with statewide implications. Bethany's face went white as camera lights illuminated her like a criminal in an interrogation room. Miss Whitmore, Jessica called out over the crowd noise, do you care to respond to allegations of housing discrimination and embezzlement of community funds? Bethany's response was pure panic. This is a private meeting. You have no right to be here. Actually, ma'am, HOA meetings are required to be open to all homeowners under Ohio law. Danny's voice carried from the back of the room where he'd been quietly documenting everything. And since criminal allegations have been raised, public interest applies? The formal vote was almost anticlimactic. Motion to remove Bethany from the board for misconduct, violation of fiduciary duty, and discriminatory enforcement passed 67-8 with 14 abstentions. She was officially stripped of all HOA authority by the same neighbors she'd spent 3 years terrorizing. But Bethany wasn't finished. In a last desperate gambit, she stood up with shaking hands and pointed directly at me. You people don't understand. Property values are everything. Communities like this require standards. People like him, she gestured at me with pure venom, bring down the entire neighborhood with their blue-collar attitudes and working-class aesthetics. The room went dead silent. She'd just confessed to housing discrimination on camera in front of 89 witnesses with a news crew recording every word. I stood up slowly, looking directly into the Channel 6 camera, and delivered the line I'd been saving for months. Ma'am, I just wanted to heat my home legally and affordably. You turned it into a federal civil rights case. Some people work with their hands. Others apparently work with stolen money and illegal discrimination. I know which one I'd rather be. The applause was thunderous. Bethany grabbed her purse and stormed toward the exit. But Jessica Walsh was waiting with more questions about embezzlement and federal investigations. As she fled to her ink-stained BMW, I realized we'd achieved something bigger than personal revenge. We'd exposed systematic corruption, protected vulnerable neighbors, and proven that working families don't have to accept abuse from entitled bullies. Justice had been served with cameras rolling and the whole community watching. 5 months later, Willowbrook Estates had transformed into the community it was always supposed to be. The new HOA board, led by Mrs. Patterson as president and Tom as treasurer, operates with transparency that would make government accountants weep with joy. Monthly meetings focus on actual community improvement instead of harassment campaigns. Our dues dropped to $185 after eliminating Bethany's phantom consulting fees, and every penny gets accounted for in public budgets that residents can actually understand. Bethany's fate? She moved to a gated community in Dublin where HOA presidents probably require security clearances and residents sign loyalty oaths. Her real estate career imploded after Channel 6's investigative series went viral. Turns out discriminatory housing practices and embezzlement charges aren't great for professional credibility. Last I heard, she was selling insurance in a strip mall and driving a Honda Civic with permanent ink stains on the upholstery. The legal settlement came through in March, after Danny presented federal prosecutors with enough evidence to staff a Netflix documentary. Bethany's attorneys negotiated a plea deal that included full restitution plus damages. The $47,000 she'd stolen got returned with interest, plus an additional $15,000 for harassment damages. Here's how we distributed that justice dividend. $8,000 went to 3 community causes that actually help working families. The Columbus Food Bank received $3,000 to support families facing economic hardship, the same families Bethany had tried to drive out. Another $3,000 funded weatherization assistance for senior citizens who can't afford rising energy costs, helping folks like Mrs. Patterson keep their homes warm without breaking the bank. The final $2,000 established a scholarship fund for community college trade programs, supporting the next generation of electricians, carpenters, and other blue-collar elements that supposedly drag down property values. I kept $7,000 for legal fees, and the stress of dealing with months of systematic harassment seemed fair compensation for accidentally uncovering a criminal conspiracy while trying to store firewood legally. The practical changes have been remarkable. Tom organized a neighborhood bulk firewood purchasing program that saves everyone money while supporting local suppliers. Mr. Dawson's vegetable garden has expanded into a community plot that feeds 12 families through summer and fall. Mrs. Patterson started monthly potluck dinners that replaced adversarial board meetings with actual relationship building. Property values? They've increased 18% since Bethany's departure, proving that communities thrive when neighbors support each other instead of conducting economic warfare. My HoloLog project became local legend. The YouTube compilation of security footage has 2.3 million views and counting, with comments from people sharing their own HOA horror stories and celebrating perfect karma delivery. 3 other neighborhoods nationwide have referenced my case in their own discrimination lawsuits, turning my ink trap into accidental legal precedent. But the real victory was discovering that standing up to bullies creates a ripple effect. Mrs. Patterson now volunteers with elder advocacy groups, teaching seniors how to document harassment and know their rights. Tom runs workshops on HOA law for working families who can't afford attorneys. Even quiet Mr. Dawson has become a community organizer, helping immigrant families navigate housing discrimination. The woodpile that started this war, still stacked in my yard, now officially approved as essential utility storage, under revised HOA guidelines that prioritize homeowner rights over aesthetic tyranny. I heat my house for $200 less per month than gas would cost, and every cord of split oak represents independence from systems designed to crush working people. Last week brought news that made everything worthwhile. The Hendersons, a young family with 3 kids, bought Bethany's old house for $40,000 less than her asking price. The husband's a paramedic, the wife teaches elementary school, and their kids have already turned the pristine front yard into an actual playground where children laugh instead of walking on eggshells. Bethany spent 3 years trying to eliminate families exactly like the Hendersons. Now they're living in her former castle while she's probably explaining ink stains to insurance adjusters. The sweetest justice is often the simplest: good people winning, bullies facing consequences, and communities healing through mutual support instead of manufactured conflict. So here's my challenge. If you're dealing with HOA harassment, document everything, know your rights, and remember that bullies count on isolation to maintain power. Share your story in the comments. You're not alone. And knowledge is the best weapon against entitled tyranny. Hit that subscribe button for more stories of underdogs beating systems designed to crush them. Because sometimes the best revenge is proving that working people don't just survive, we thrive when we stick together.